Why Yandere Simulator? Why is that the comparison you made?
Gamer girl, I need to fucking simp.
That was a lie. We're not done yet.
All of them are fucking idiots.
Let's talk about them.
Wait.
Don't take that out of context.
My brain is like racing now.
It's your intro.
It is my guilty boner. Does Molecular attract the kind of people that are into serial killers? That's still bigger than a city.
It's more than one planet.
Percy Jackson is Greek mythology fanfiction.
Boneless. Oh my god.
I want the... No.
That reminds me of, like, there's a stereotype around D&D players, and I don't know if you've run into this, Alex, but I've, as a female identifying person myself, I've had people look me in the face and been like, I don't see a lot of pretty girls that play D&D. And I've had people not take me serious when they've seen, like, when I've mentioned that I play D&D, or they brush it off. And there's this weird, or people are like, D&D is still a thing, like, if they're not involved in it already, kind of thing.
I've never run into someone that has said that kind of thing personally, but I see it online a lot. Because I'm also on Tumblr, and Tumblr always gets the fun discourse from Twitter, and stuff. So I see it a lot. There's a lot of gatekeepers in the community, I think. And yeah, so there's a lot of, and then, from an outside perspective, I think a lot of people don't get it. If they've never played it, or if they don't really understand it, it does seem like a weird thing, I guess.
It is kind of daunting, role-playing, right? And I'm glad it's become more accessible, because I'm very much not a gatekeeper. I had some talks with Lee about this the other day, off podcast. I'm part of some of the most elitist communities in the world, I'll be entirely honest. Goths are super elitist, and I really try to not. Every subculture and hobby should be inclusive. But at the same time, when you become very open and inclusive, you let a lot of bad in too. So people that want to gatekeep can now get access and treat it like their own private club. And it also lets in, to use a no better term, bad players. That guys and the like. And I've played with several at this point. And it's just kind of a risk. When things get big, I'm really glad it's more inclusive and a lot of people can get in, but that means we're not letting in the best people either, right?
Yeah.
That reminds me of this TikToker who does toxic player stories. And it started out with her own stories of being in a campaign where there was the person who was dating the DM was just a toxic player but got away with it because they're dating the DM. And then people were suggesting, telling her stories that were happening to them that had happened to them in the comments. So she started doing little skits about other people's stories and everything, and her page on TikTok blew up. I can't remember what her handle is, but yeah.
Speaking of toxic player stories, anyone got any fun ones they want to share with the group?
I don't personally have any toxic player stories, but I've been in groups where somebody realized, hey, my character is not working in this group. We had in my main group, we have one person who's playing a wizard tiefling that was neutral evil or something. His character sheet just said N evil, and he joked that it was not evil, but we all knew. And they realized this character has no reason to fight with our group against these evil gods we were fighting, so they retired him and have picked up a different character now.
You encountered any of the trash, Alex?
Actually, I have not. Most of my groups have been pretty tight-knit. I do have one story that I think you might find kind of funny, Tyler, which is when I first started up my group, I had 3 players. One of them was like a friend of mine who is a very, very religious, like a Christian. And so she kind
All
of
right,
started
this is
playing it
starting
first.
great. Yep, let's go.
Yeah. See, yeah, But yeah, so it started out like pretty good. She enjoyed her character. Wasn't like quite as into the roleplay as everyone else, but was like still enjoying herself. And then like a month or 2 later, she texts me out of the blue and goes, "Hey, I can't play D&D anymore." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Why? What happened?" And she's just like, "Well, basically, I went to this thing and it was talking about like mindfulness and stuff, and D&D came up at this thing I was at, and apparently it invites demons into your life, and I can't do that because of like her religion, so I can't play anymore."
Alrighty, so I wasn't going to hit this topic quite so early in the podcast, but let's talk about the Satanic Panic.
Oh
Alright.
my.
Alright. So,
Relevant, yeah.
as an avid participating Satanist, heavy metal enthusiast, and D&D player, I do all the things that Christians hate. And the fact that people were persecuted and jailed because they played D&D and the overly Christian media and governments decided that this was not a good Christian activity is sickening. Playing a game got people thrown in fucking jail. That's like if COD was suddenly banned and all these dude bros, like my brother in the background, suddenly got jailed. My house would definitely be quiet, but I think I'd miss my brother. Like, it's insane that this whole religious fervor existed and focused mainly on 2 things, which was heavy metal music and D&D. And as people who've played D&D, how many demons are in your 2 bodies? I can't speak for myself. It's a lot, but how about you 2?
The jury's out on that one. I can't tell you that as a practicing witch and a pagan.
Got a lot of demons there, Alex?
You know what? I still don't have a demon girlfriend, so I don't think it's working out the way I'd like it to.
Oof, yeah. Where's my succubus GF? How dare. But yeah, speaking as a demon-possessed individual, no demons in D&D, surprisingly little.
I saw this story on Reddit where they, coming from a very Christian background, still wanted to play D&D. So instead of using like the different gods and such, there was just the main god, and then there were the saints, that you could be a cleric of a saint, so that they could just still go with the different cleric domains and such, but you weren't like a cleric of a pagan god. You were a cleric to Saint Valentine or something.
Yeah, fuck them snakes. Kidding.
I mean, that's an interesting way to do it, though.
Yeah, if you really want to include Christianity in yet another media form, my goodness. I almost said my God there, but I'd be referencing a very different God to the Christian one, so I decided not to.
I mean, I'm right here.
Oh, yes, my dear deity, yes. I don't know. I don't think saying "Oh, Alex" will have the same ring. I think people will get the wrong impression.
That's fair.
All right, but we're talking about God and sexy D&D again, so let's stop that. Back to toxic players. Oh boy, I got a little doozy of a player. So one of the things I did try for a while was doing Adventure League, which is offered by a lot of local game stores around the world. And I do like it for getting people into the hobby. I know a lot of people have found groups from it. Adventure League, for those of you that don't know, is predetermined adventures that are handed out with the seasons that D&D releases books in through Wizards of the Coast, their main publisher and company. I believe the 1st and 5th edition was like Curse of Strahd. Don't quote me on this. I didn't play Curse of Strahd yet. But each adventure module they put out, they will typically run a season of Adventure League relating to it. And DMs will come and volunteer for groups of players that are completely random, and they'll usually get gift cards and points towards things for doing this, and run a group. And I once played in one of those groups for a while. Got in at the end of a season. I had fun, no doubt. DM was good, but there was one gentleman. Not going to list any names, but they were very much what I would consider a that guy, which is a large overarching term for a variety of bad players. Very much center of attention. If I think of a funny joke, even though the DM is in the middle of a monologue, I'm going to say it. I'm going to interrupt, ruin whatever tension they were trying to build. We're having a scene with another character's backstory coming up, and they're really getting into it. But the scene's not on me, so I'd better start talking, and better get in this as best I can. And that's just roleplay-wise. Combat was much of the same. We're fighting wolves. The druid turns into a wolf to fight back. My dude pops out of a tent. It's like, I see a wolf, I slash at it. And DM's like, all right, that's your druid. And he tells him straight up, you know it's your druid. You've seen him turn into this wolf many times. You know he has this ability. Why would you do that? He's like, I just woke up, I'm panicked, I'm going to slash at my friend. He's like, all right, this is Adventure League. You literally can't do any PvP, so you just miss. And he's like, okay, cool. I use both my attacks and I just end the turn. Instead of usefully participating at all. And that's just one of many stories about this gentleman. And it's not even the worst, because I don't think I want to share the worst. I'll be honest. Yeah, that guys. I prefer edgelords to that guys even, because at least edgelords are kind of predictable.
That being said, not all Adventure League tables are bad. I've never been to them, but I have a couple of friends that like swear by it. Was one of their favorite things to do. They'd go out like on Wednesday nights. I think was when our local ones were happening, but they had regular tables, so they knew all of the players at their table, and it was always those players because they'd fill the table with those people, and so they were able to build that cohesion in their group. One of them did tell me a story about one guy who joined their table who wouldn't follow like the rules they had set out. So one of those rules was their stats for D&D characters. There are multiple ways to create the stats, but there's a point buy, which is what everybody else at the table used, except this gentleman had rolled their stats, even though they were told not to. So his stats were a lot higher than the others, at like 18s at the very beginning. But otherwise, like that table was really good and such. It all depends on who you end up with.
Yeah, and that's why, there's a bit of randomness involved. I'd still like to try it. I'm just scared. Just scared as all. But you bring up another interesting point, unless, Alex, you have a story to share.
No, I was just gonna say, I think, jumping off that, I do think D&D is about who you play with. And it's gonna be a different experience if you have like a group that you don't work well with. It's not gonna be fun. And I think an important part about having fun with D&D is finding people that you play well with.
Oh, definitely. And I preached before, like, group cohesion, and as Marie-Soleil said, session 0. As a DM, I kind of accept resumes from players to some extent when forming groups, and not like, oh, this is how many years I've had and stuff like that. It's more like, what type of games do I want to play? What type of stories do I want to tell? Tell me about those, and let me work those together into the campaign, right? It's like, it's not so much a character sheet as a player sheet telling me about the type of stories you like to tell, which is a very important aspect of, again, a collaborative storytelling game.
That is smart. And also, like, I've seen a lot of people doing stuff like that, and also talking about like what would trigger them if it showed up in a game and such, so that the DM knows what to avoid bringing into their game.
Limits, very important, especially nowadays. Having limits on games, hard limits, soft limits, and stuff like that is is very important. And I've seen a lot of backlash against the inclusion of this because I believe even some of the most recent manuals have come out with like the X card rule. I don't know how much either of you have heard about that.
I've heard it before, but
I
Alex?
have not.
Okay, so it's basically a safe word for D&D. You have a little card with an X on it, and if the DM is doing something or a player is doing something that is a hard limit for you, or you didn't know it was a hard limit, or it's a scene that's making you uncomfortable, you can pass them this X card, which is signaling typically a halt to the game or a lessening of detail, depending on, the player and DM agreement. I've never used an X card. Most of my groups were open enough that if I'm doing something that you don't like, you just straight up tell me. But I think it's a wonderful rule to include with how widespread the game is now, especially if we've got players who are nervous, new, shy, and don't feel comfortable speaking up about like, hey, this is not making me feel good. This is making me very uncomfortable. I think being able to have that little thing, like texting also works obviously, but if the DM doesn't check their phone and continues the scene, you could end up in a bad position. So there's a little X card that you can just like pass under the table to your DM to be like, hey, I need a moment for this one. This one's too hard. This one's too far. Can we change this up? I think that's wonderful. And as a DM, I would love to know if something I said is fucking you up and you don't want it, because that is not the point of me playing a game. It's really not. I'm here to make everyone have fun and be comfortable. So this inclusion of X card in like actual written rules for D&D itself, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I agree. That does sound like a good rule.
So much backlash though. All the old gatekeepers were like, no, you signed up for this story. This is what we're doing. And I'm like, dude, you are abusing people's characters and their trust. You need to chill. This game's supposed to be fun for everyone, not just for you, you sadistic prick.
Yep.
Yep, that makes sense to me. D&D has changed a lot, though. Like, I got this book about, I can't remember what it's called, but it's about combat tactics and stuff in D&D. So basically how, like, teaching you how the best ways to play your characters, so to speak, in combat and such. So you just so you know what you can do and what you can't do. And it was explaining how, like, in the first editions of D&D, there were so many rules about, like, what races could play what classes and the stats you had to do. Like, I guess barbarians were originally illiterate. Like, all barbarians were illiterate. They couldn't read, was literally a rule.
First edition was a weird time, okay, but continue.
And now it's gotten to a point where it's like, you want to play like a Goliath's wizard, who's kind of the nerd of D&D. Wizards are pretty much nerds of D&D. Wizards and monks. And Goliaths are like giants and typically more meat-headed, so to speak. That's totally fine. You can play whatever you want.
Yeah, I did a research paper about like diversity and like inclusion in D&D for a class last year. And so that was one of the things that came up was like how like races especially, and like even the term races is a questionable one, honestly, but like how they've become like less restrictive over time and less like defined by like certain rules. Because if you go scroll through like different playable races, there'll be a section where it's like, oh, this is this society that this race lives in, they tend to be like evil because of this, blah blah blah, which is something that one of my bigger issues with D&D is the alignment system. But then a lot of people will kind of not really play with that because they disagree with it or it doesn't really add anything to their game. And then even with, I know when Tasha's Cauldron of Everything came out, they kind of included a new rule where you didn't necessarily have to follow the ability score stuff that goes with each races. You know how like certain ones are going to give you like strength and con because they're the big ones, but if those don't line up with the class you want to play, you can change those to whatever you think suits your character better.
Yes. Oh my god, I'm glad you brought up Tashes. I love that rule.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to like look back on how restrictive everything used to be and how it's slowly becoming like more and more open, and allows for a lot more like diverse and interesting characters, I think.
I agree, and I'm going to tell a quick story for Lee because Lee isn't here, and this is the exact point that Lee would share it. Lee, if you're listening to this, and you would better be, you're welcome. So, Lee started playing D&D, and she's played D&D most of her life with her family. Her dad was an old school nerd and would play with her and her sisters and her mother. And they played old editions of D&D to start, where Drow were not a player character race. You could not play Drow. Dark Elves, for anyone who's listening and doesn't know. And that's because they were a monster race. And these were old restrictive times with old viewpoints. But I think it was 3.5 or 4 Drow suddenly became a playable race in a supplement. And now in 5th edition, they're straight up in the regular player's handbook. You can play a Dark Elf. And she tells that her entire family has played Dark Elves all the time now to spite their father, who wouldn't let them play at the beginning of D&D. And it's become, she thought it would be a problem because she's running a family campaign right now. And she was like, I'm betting that all of my sisters are going to play Drow. And I'm just going to have an Underdark Drow campaign because we all want that forbidden fruit. And she herself loves Drow, knows most of the histories and the Forgotten Realms. I think she's read the Drizzt novels of R.A. Salvatore. I know I was building an Underdark campaign for a solo with her for a while there, so yeah. Drow are a very interesting case in, D&D used to be restrictive and a little bit overtly racist, and I'm really glad we're getting out of that. Just a little. I mean, they're dark elves who live in the underground and no one's allowed to play them because they're straight up evil. Yeah, just a little.
Drow are great, though. I'm a big fan of them.
I love my matriarchal murder sex cult. Also spiders.
I don't love spiders.
Me neither.
I like spiders. Lolthus Bay.
Almost gave up my apartment to a spider once.
Burn it down.